And here's the thing. How do we fix the UK health crisis? And it's right that we use the word crisis, by the way. You know that phrase, they kicked the can into the long grass? It's never going to happen in our lifetimes, so let's not worry about it now. We'll deal with it some other time. That kind of thinking. And they did this with public sector pensions, of course, in the late 1940s, when they decided that anyone who works in the public sector can retire at about 50 on an index-linked pension, probably a one-off payment of 50k to see you nicely on your way. Essentially, you only got to work half your life. Nice work if you can get it. But by the late 1950s, they knew this was clearly not achievable given the unrecognisable increase in the amount of public sector workers and the billions of pounds of money that would be needed. So they kicked the can into the long grass. Someone else can deal with it. The 60s, the 70s, the 80s came and went, and still that can was rusting away in some distant, overgrown lawn. And then by around about the 2000s, they suddenly realised they needed to deal with it, and all hell broke loose. You know the rest. And while public sector workers were having it off royally with gold-plated pensions, another row was brewing behind the scenes. NHS, and in particular social care. So think about this. The population of the UK in 1940 was around about 48 million. Today, it's not far off 68 million. The average UK lifespan back in 1940 was about 66. Today, it's 81. Now, you don't need to be a student of medical statistics to spot the problem. 20 million more people, all living 15 years longer. The NHS and social care was always going to take a hit, but it was kicked into the long grass. That can stay there for decades, of course. Today, it's been retrieved, and now politicians are looking at this as if they've just stumbled on a large lump of kryptonite. This is where we're at. Boris Johnson said he would deal with it. He sort of tried, but it was never going to be enough. And today we get this warning. The NHS and social care are in the most perilous position in memory. A group of leading charities have warned this. This is the Richmond Group of Charities. We'll be chatting shortly to their chief executive. They said systems were reaching crunch point, which would mean the NHS and social care services are completely unable to respond to local needs in a growing number of places. Let's just think about this, and let's just fess up and recognise this. We have a crisis, a genuine crisis. This country should be dealing with this as a national emergency. We should be on a war footing over this right now. A country that can't look after its elderly is not fit for purpose. And that's where we're at on this. I'm happy to take your comments on the wider issue of the NHS. As Kevin O'Sullivan said, we talk about this all the time, and we always talk about, oh, it's going to be the worst winter on record, etc. We're talking here about the entire calendar year. This isn't just about the fact that obviously you get the chills at winter time and the flus and the COVIDs return, etc. as a bit more pressure, and the NHS seem to deal with it. What we're not recognising is that shortage of staff. We're not recognising the increase in elderly patients. We're not recognising people living longer, and we're not recognising that it probably needs in some areas a few more quid to make it work. I'm thinking social care in particular. So in that area, you think of carers and the like, 165,000 shortage. Just let that settle in for 1 second. 165,000 shortage of people in the care sector. A growing population, a growing elderly population. You haven't got to be a senior clinician to work out that this is a proper crisis. This is the definition of the word crisis. This is exactly where the entire focus of the government should be. And every time we talk about it, I sense our eyes sort of glaze over a bit and we go, well, it's probably not going to affect me and not really in my family. And then it does. And then you find yourself in that place. And I will repeat this story. I told this about halfway through the show yesterday, but it's worth just reminding you of the kind of situation that you can find yourself in. So around about 4 weeks ago, my father-in-law sadly passed away. And in the 5 weeks before he died, he was in hospital for those 5 weeks. Now, it was quite clear he was in a bad way, and it was quite clear he wasn't going to get better. And during that time, it was widely recognised that he should probably be at home. Because being in the hospital was, it was probably very depressing. In fact, it was depressing for him. It was doing nothing for his mood, and he was sort of drifting in and out, as is often the case when you're at a situation where you're really not going to make it long term. But he was aware that he was in an area that he didn't want to be in hospital. He wanted to be home, and the family wanted him home as well. And the hospital said, well, we can't send him home because you need the care package put in place. And we said, well, how long does the care package take? They said it might be months. Well, what is a care? What does that look like? We can look after him. They said, well, you can do some of that stuff, but, he will need some specific care. There's also respite needed, even if you are looking after your loved one, etc. So you don't think you're going to find yourself in this situation. And I was, my other half was dealing with this more so than clearly I was. And the conversation she had with doctors and nurses, there were so many of them. And what seemed to happen is you'd have a conversation with one doctor, and then you wouldn't see that doctor again or that nurse again, and somebody else would come on shift, and you'd have to tell them the whole story again, and then the consultant would come around, you've got to tell them the whole story again. And it was quite clear to everybody in this story that the system was absolutely on its knees. They didn't really know what to do. It wasn't a case of saying, patient number 362 is leaving hospital now. This is their address. They live in number 118 Acacia Avenue. Make sure that every now and again somebody is down there, two nurses, two carers, somebody to change the beds and do all the medicines, etc. It doesn't happen like that because there's not enough people to make it happen. And in the end, he was so desperate to leave hospital, and the whole family were desperate for him to leave hospital. And in those last few days, it was quite clear that he wasn't going to make it beyond a few days. And so the decision was taken to allow him to go home. But it took a lot of pressure from my partner to make this happen. And eventually an ambulance showed up, and they took him in the ambulance and dropped him home. He actually sang when he came out of the ambulance. This is a man that is 80 years old. He has severe Parkinson's and dementia, which goes with that, as many of you will know. As he came out of the ambulance and was carried into his own house, he sang. He was aware that his surroundings had changed. And 2 days later, he passed away in the place where he would have wanted to be. But the rigmarole around all of that, this is one patient, just one example, and arguably there are cases where there aren't family around in the same kind of way. I mean, at least we could have done something and did in that very short period of time. What do you do if you've got nothing? What do you do if that's your dad, your mum, your grandparent? In some cases, it may even be somebody younger in the family. Social care isn't just exclusive to the elderly, of course. But there are huge gaps in this. It's an absolute travesty. We're talking about this a bit more now. Not nearly enough. This should be the front pages every single day. This should be almost Rishi Sunak's only song. Daily we should be talking about how do we solve this problem? Massive shortage, elderly population, growing population. How do we solve the crisis? It is a crisis. We should be looking at this as you would any other national emergency. The way we dealt with COVID, we should be dealing with this right now. In fact, some of this right now is because perhaps of the way we dealt with COVID, but we need an absolute focus on this. And if you've had this in your own family, where the NHS or social care has cost a life, or certainly made that life more uncomfortable than it needed to be, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'll say this to everybody listening and watching right now. Law of averages, you will be there one day. It'll either be yourself or someone in your family. And as we sit here today, our government is not doing anywhere near enough to address what is a crisis. It's as simple as that. 0344 499 1000. How do we fix the UK health crisis? Let's just move to this then. A police officer injured on the M25 amid climate protest which closed part of the motorway in Kent, Surrey, Essex and Hertfordshire. The police motorcyclist was hurt in a collision which also involved two lorries at a rolling roadblock. Two people arrested for causing a public nuisance. The Just Stop Oil group, which is protesting for a third day, said about 10 activists climbed an overhead gantries in multiple locations. Isn't it time somebody just said enough? Isn't it time somebody just stopped these people, dragged them off the gantries, threw them all in jail, and then we can move on? And if it happens again tomorrow, go back and do it another time. Norman Brennan, former cop, is with us. He's director of the Law and Order Foundation. What is going on here, Norman? We are seeing this day in, day out at the moment. The disruption is absolutely massive. There's been a handful of arrests, but clearly it's not enough.
Well, clearly not. I mean, I'll get straight to the point. We're dealing here, Ian, with moronic, arrogant, selfish, domestic terrorists, because this is what these individuals have become. They're holding hundreds of thousands of motorists to ransom. The government are not really listening any more than what they're listening to everyone else that's got serious problems. But it appears that this selfish lot have this right to hold the rest of us to ransom.
Yeah.
If all of us with issues, concerns, and we've all got issues and concerns, more so this day and age than any time probably since the Second World War II, and we all took to the streets and gantries and obstructed the roads and people's right of way and transport, public, both on trains and buses, etc., the country would be in true chaos. It would be anarchy. Yet these individuals, they go out and they know that they will get tens of millions of pounds worth of publicity for their cause. They're not stupid. And here we are talking about them.
Yeah.
What about all the other issues that is affecting tens of millions of us who don't take to the streets and don't obstruct our fellow citizens, but look to our MPs and other organisations to fight our causes?
This has got to stop, though, hasn't it? I mean, whatever the implications, there's got to... Is there... And I know strategically it's not as easy as just sending a load of police officers there and dragging people off gantries. That is in itself, it's quite a complicated process to do that safely, etc. No one wants anybody to die, even if they are royally annoying and an utter pain for all concerned. But you might think, Norman, that it's not beyond the wit of mankind to have what I suppose you might say a more robust way of dealing with these characters.
Well, to be quite honest with you, I do feel sorry for the police to a certain degree, because it's a bit like cat and mouse. There's only so many police officers available. Now, these individuals will be driving around the M25, which is, 50, 60 miles in circumference. And what they'll do is they will go out in carfuls, or two or three of them, full of people, and where there's no police about and where there's a free gantry, they'll drop them off. So it matters. Unless we had a police officer at every gantry, you could never catch the mice every single time.
Yeah.
But I come back to the point that the whole country now is sickened of these people. They're not getting sympathy from people. In fact, the anger is getting worse and worse. Every day they obstruct fellow citizens. And their fellow citizens are ones that have lost jobs, try to keep jobs to feed their family, that are facing rising bills right across the board, including their mortgages. These people are living dire lives, yet are fighting to keep jobs, fighting to pay their bills. And these selfish, arrogant, moronic, domestic terrorists, as I say, are holding this country to ransom. There has to be a court injunction which states that if you break this injunction, you will go to prison immediately and you will not be released for a minimum of 3 months. That means all these selfish, arrogant, moronic individuals will spend Christmas in prison thinking about all of those people that are fighting to try and provide their own families for Christmas themselves.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And of course, it's not just, I had a delivery meant to arrive this morning. It was late because of this. And, the oil protesters will go, we're not shedding any tears for the fact your kitchen was late. OK, fine, don't shed any tears for my kitchen, but shed some tears for the person that couldn't get to their own parents' funeral. Shed some tears for James Whale, who couldn't get to a cancer appointment. Shed tears for those that have doctor appointments for their children, etc. There are some really serious cases now, Norman, building up around this.
You've hit the nail on the head exactly. There are surgeons that were caught in those hold-ups. There are millions of people that have been suffering and waiting in pain for years for the National Health Service to catch up and give them their opportunity to have an operation that they have suffered in pain 24/7 for. Yet these surgeons, and there's been a number of them, I've seen them on social media saying, I'm caught in traffic. Today, I will not be able to carry out or perform a number of operations. As I say, we can't keep on having these interviews, Ian, and just keep talking about the same problems. It's pretty much about knife crime. I've talked about that for 30 years. And we've got a country now that are giving up on everything. They're giving up on the government, the criminal justice system. We've got nurses going out on strikes. We've got the ferry ports going out on strikes, the rail people going on strikes. A madness has taken over Britain. People in their tens of millions are sitting at home working and at weekends and have nothing to look forward to. And all they keep seeing day in and day out, instead of something positive, some light at the end of the tunnel, they see people complaining. Well, we've all got the right to complain, but we haven't got the right to act unlawfully and obstruct our motorways and highways and our public transport to the detriment of the rest of society. Because, as I stated earlier, if we all took the same view, then there would be chaos on the streets, and that is anarchy. And that is where the strongest survive. And believe you me, these people up on the gantries and those whinging and whining in front of social media will not be one of the strongest. I can assure you on that.
Yeah, spot on. Norman, thank you. Norman Brennan, former cop.
Once you've listened to that explanation, you can't do anything but agree with me, right?
Well, I can. I completely disagree with you. And you, as always, your argument is, I'm right because I'm always right.
Well, unfortunately, it happens to be the case.
Yeah, you see what I mean?
Being right all the time is difficult. I can do it.
You're wrong.
Do you want to have a drink?
Yeah.
We don't always share the same view, but we can still share a drink. All opinions welcome at talkTV, the home of common sense.
So let's then move to that story. I mentioned that figure, 30,000 parking tickets a day. I mean, ministers, as you remember, did promise to crack down on cowboy operators. So whether these are all legit, I kind of roughly did the maths. It's about 11 million tickets a year for parking your car on the wrong coloured paint or tarmac, or somehow not adhering to a timer that gave you a certain limit. These are shocking figures, revealing ruthless private companies issuing 2.7 million tickets to drivers between just April and June, or one every 3 seconds. It means parking firms are on track to issue demands for up to £1 billion. I mean, just let that settle for a second. £1 billion in fines this year, and the figures only apply to car parks run by private firms. That doesn't include councils, so it would be much higher. Ministers last night faced renewed calls to get tougher on pirate firms, causing misery for millions of motorists amid the cost of living crisis and sky-high fuel prices. Have you received a parking ticket from one of those kind of companies? And even when you try to argue this thing, it went on and on and on. It got nasty. Did you end victoriously, or were you several hundred or even thousands of pounds out of pockets? Let's speak with Barry Siegel, founder of parkingticketexpert.com and appealnow.com. How are you doing, Barry?
I'm very well, thank you, Ian.
Good to see you again. Listen, we can talk about cowboy clampers and parking firms. I suppose some of these, maybe most of these, whether we like it or not, are actually legit.
Well, some are legit, but the real problem is that there's no proper oversight or transparency. And, for example, your film actually showed a motorist getting a parking ticket from a local authority parking attendant. Now, in that situation, the appeal process is defined by law, and it's very, very straightforward. When you appeal to a parking ticket company, a private company, you are not really dealing with a legislative issue. You're dealing with a company whose only interest is getting your money.
Yeah.
Local authorities aren't permitted to issue parking tickets to make a profit. But all these private companies are actually profit-making companies, and I've seen some of the accounts, and you could run a small country from some of their profits.
Yeah.
So the big problem initially is the appeal process. And the other problem is that when the private company turns you down, you have to appeal to an independent tribunal. And I think that the current system of the private parking tribunals is broken. And I think it needs a totally new system and some other long-term issues which need to be dealt with.
Absolutely. What is the way forward on this? Because this has been, I think you and I first spoke about 20 years ago, Barry, on this very issue. And here we are in 2022, and it hasn't gone away.
No, it hasn't. The only thing that's gone away is my hair. But the issue for local authorities has got a little better. It's more transparent.
Yeah.
For private parking companies, not at all. If anything, it's gone worse. The only good thing is the government prevented clamping and towing away, so that can't happen. But the issue in terms of members of the public appealing these private parking tickets has got worse.
Yeah.
And you can see the numbers, as you pointed out, one private parking ticket every 3 seconds.
This is an extraordinary figure, isn't it? So what's the advice then? I mean, this is, you know, this has been your world for a long time. What is, if you get one of these tickets, and I mean, if you've been parking illegally, then I suppose you have to take it on the chin, right? I mean, the fact that the company has been given the licence to operate in that area is an argument between the local authority or the government and the company. But if you've illegally parked, you might have to take it on the chin. If there is a discrepancy, I mean, what's the broad advice, Barry, on these things in terms of what drivers should do?
Well, the main thing is get all your ducks in a row. So take pictures of the signs, take pictures of the road markings, take pictures of where the sign was located, which is very important. And then put together an appeal. Don't use any rude language or all sorts of things that I've seen, and lodge the appeal with the parking company. Now, most of your appeals will be turned down, and then your alternative is to go to the independent tribunals, and there are 2 you can appeal to, and do the same appeal. Now, whether you'll be successful, I don't know. But the important thing is not to just leave it. It's important to appeal straight away in a, how should I say, in a delicate way.
And that's the advice. Do it in a delicate way and see where it goes. Barry, thank you. Great to have you on again. Barry Siegel, founder of parkingticketexpert.com and appealnow.com. I would check out both of those sites if you found yourself in this place. Look, I just say this whenever this subject comes up. One of the things you're never meant to talk about on the radio, on programmes like this, are parking tickets and speeding tickets, because everybody's got one, everyone's got a story. We all sniff an injustice and we all think we're the only person and our story is worse than anybody else's. However, let's leap forward from that. There are stories that are just to the north end of unbelievable. When every law of logic, every law of basic decency, every law of appealing to common sense goes out the window, and you find yourself up against a system, and a system where there might not even be an individual to speak to. Automated systems, faceless people on emails, trying to retell the story to another operative at the parking ticket company for the umpteenth time because you've already explained it to 6 of their colleagues and it wasn't registered and you've got to start again. Going through this. So I'm talking here not about, we've all had a parking ticket and we've all sometimes chanced our arm and parked somewhere, and actually, you know, if you don't get a ticket, fantastic. If you do get one, you do have to take it on the chin. But what about those stories where it was unequivocal? There was no way you should have got this thing. Everything was around you. All the evidence corroborated your story, your plea for a bit of basic parking justice. But it fell on utter deaf ears because the faceless bods and bureaucrats and fat cats over there at Parking Ticket HQ, they were having none of it. They weren't going to buy your old flannel juice and gibberish. They were absolutely sure that you owed them 150 quid, and if you didn't pay in 10 days, 300 quid, thank you. Oh, and then we'll double it 10 days after. 600 quid, really? No, we'll double that. What, 1,200? Yep. What next? Then we come around your house and take away your goods. Oh, hang on. You're going to come to my house and take away my jumbo flat screen because I parked on some yellow paint? Because I parked outside the Rose and Crown, which apparently has a policy where you're not allowed to, despite the fact I just had a tasty ploughman's lunch inside the very establishment? My punishment for that is to take away my flat-screen TV and my iPhone If I'd have robbed the pub, I wouldn't be punished with that level of severity. I think that's the bit that is irksome in all of this, isn't it? It's not just the concept of the parking ticket barons and the cowboys. These people will always be among us. It's the amount of money involved for what has to be, unless you've parked, you know, on the side of a roundabout, a spaghetti junction. If you've done that, if you decided to, I don't know, drop your car off just on the inside lane of the M25, yeah, I get that. Tow the car away, crush the darn thing. But in the broader picture of criminality, this must sit so low down the level, and yet the punishment, the heady amounts of cash involved in this are so darn high. You hear stories of people who end up, because of the constant back and forth and the time delays, that's how they get you, isn't it? If you pay this in 14 days, all of that. And because of that, some people end up with thousands. How? Thousands of pounds. All I did was park. It's a parking offence, mate. Why am I being fined more than if I wrapped a pint glass around someone's head in the aforementioned pub? This is madness. Here is the thing. How do we solve the knife crime epidemic? And we wouldn't use that word loosely. That is what we're dealing with here. Same headline, same story, same form, same age of victim, same cause of death. 2 more teens stabbed in London on Saturday. The names of Ken Solenki and Charlie Bartolo are just 2 of the dozens who've met their fate in the same way. Street crime, knife crime. Kids who think they're part of the Bloods or the Crips, whatever. This is their way of life. This is the script. They live by the sword. They die by the sword. But for what? Even when you look at some of the most notorious gangs that we've known globally, there were even rules within the Brotherhood. These kids don't have any of those. A row online, an insulting Snapchat video, not showing respect, invariably from the last people who should command any kind of respect. But all of these things are enough for someone to end your life. I mean, let that just hang there for a few moments. You took the mick out of somebody on social media, so I'm going to end your life. Bad enough to want to give somebody a kicking because they insulted your trainers, but to plunge a dagger into somebody's heart for it is a whole other level. But we're kind of used to this. But where the hell did these people learn this? Your default position when somebody has upset you is to kill them. He's upset me, I'm going to kill them. How did we get there? What is the thinking? What's the template? What is the root of all of that? I'll tell you something, and often in broad daylight as well. I mean, this happened at 5:10 in the afternoon or something. And we look at the numbers, and there have been many, 119 homicides in the last reporting year and counting. If this was young women being killed at this rate, there would be an industrial-scale fallout and an inquiry. We would not stop talking about this. Politicians would be climbing over each other to make their points known. The police would set up a special unit dedicated to this curious scenario, this unfathomable moment in our anthropological journey where women are being killed by the dozens. On a weekly basis, we have these deaths. But it's not women, it's young teenage boys. They don't seem to matter to the powers that be in the same kind of way. And we've discussed this, I don't know how many times. We'll talk to Norman Brennan, our friend and former police officer, shortly. He will shine light on this. He's been campaigning for decades on this. Nothing changes. Nothing's got any better. No great resolutions. The Mayor of London, by the way, is in charge of policing. Where is he? Where is Sadiq Khan? He's got more to say about the possibility of you caught driving a diesel car on the wrong road than he does if you're caught carrying a foot-long blade in your hand. This is seismic. This is up there with any crisis. Where is Sadiq Khan? What does he have to say, and why does he have to say more on fining motorists than he does over dead kids? Quite literally, you couldn't have got him out the traps any faster last week when he announced the ULEZ zone is being extended. Oh, yes, if you're driving the wrong car over there in Bromley, we're going to whack you with a £12.50 fine. On a daily basis, you'll have to pay 12. It's going to cost very big on that. 2 16-year-olds. Think about the age, man. 16 years of age. Dead in the street. Life hasn't even begun. Slaughtered, taken down at 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon by a knife. Gone. Finished. 2 more stats to a growing, grim list of fatal statistics that sadly, every time we come on and talk about this, that list gets bigger. Donovan Allen, Tyler Hurley. The list goes on. Jeremiah Sewell, Deshaun Tuitt, Shea Gordon, Kane Moses. I mean, I could go on. There are dozens and dozens. And that's just this year. What the hell has gone wrong? Where is the Mayor of London? Where are the government on this? Where's the Home Office? Where's the mass inquiry? Where's the big fallout to this? Kids dying, slaughtered in the street. And we're not talking about cases here of children whose lives ended after a prolonged argument. There'd been fights, there'd been fisticuffs, there'd been battles, they tried to solve the dispute. No, 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 there's none of that. This is the default position. The kid in that postcode insulted the kid in that postcode. Therefore, I'm going to take a machete and I'm going to kill him. Who taught these children that? Where does that come from? And I'm bound to throw in a fairly root one question here. Until we're blue in the face, we will keep asking, how do we solve the knife crime epidemic? What's the beginning of that process? Well, we could at least sit here and go, OK, we haven't fully solved, but this is what we do to begin with. We can talk about feckless parents. We can talk about fatherless homes, and I'm sure all of those things are a factor. We can talk about the fact that some of these kids, often young black boys, have been educated to believe that life as a young black boy is going to be rubbish, that the entire system is against you. We have sensible people, the good and, well, not so sensible as it turns out, the good and the great, politicians, telling kids that, educating those kids. Before they're even out of short trousers, they've learned to believe that their life is going to be rubbish. Why do they think this? Because some politicians told them. Because social media is full of it. Because the left-wing intelligentsia are telling them that on a daily basis. That doesn't help either. But ultimately, there's much more to this. It's gang-related for sure. The idea that you don't get to your 20th birthday. These boys never got to their 18th. Taken down at 5 in the afternoon in the capital city in 2022. And it should be shocking. Do you know what? It's not even that shocking anymore, is it? Because you go, oh, it's just another 2 street kids. Just another 2. It's just happened again. And again. There were some more last week, and the week before there were others, and the week before that there were others. In these grim statistics, there are some women, but it's mostly men. In the homicide rate, it's mostly young boys. And we're talking about young teens here. 0344 499 1000, the youngest victim being 14. Throughout the country, of course, we've seen other cases where children, even younger, have been slaughtered on our streets.
He's back, and he's uncensored. Debating the breaking news and talking to the biggest names. Piers Morgan is live every week with a host of stars. Uncompromising, unmissable, and uncensored. And remember,
if you're thinking it, we're talking about it.
Piers Morgan Uncensored, Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on talkTV.
Let's go to this story then. Electric car owners might be forced to pay road tax for the first time. These are plans to fill a £54 billion hole in public finances. Jeremy Hunt, of course, is set tomorrow to have his mini budget, which means emission-free cars and vans currently pay, which means that those emission-free cars that currently pay no vehicle excise duty might be asked to pay for the first time. You've got to somehow fill that gap. There's a £7 billion shortfall in road tax as people switch to electric. Where does the money come from? It's likely to prove controversial, of course, as it will act as a disincentive to motorists thinking of going green at a time when soaring energy prices are already undermining the financial case for switching to electric. Let's speak to our friend Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK. Did you see this one coming, Howard? Afternoon to you.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes, I'm afraid I did see it coming. It couldn't have gone on forever. The fact that the government have put a draconian ban on us from 2030 for petrol and diesel new car sales is forcing us. It's a shame that electric vehicles can't stand in their own four tyres on their own benefits, because they've had to put a ban in place. And it had to happen. And the whole aspect of, the fact they haven't been paying tax because they have no emissions coming out actually decries the fact that from cradle to grave, there's not much difference between petrol and diesel engines and electric vehicles in terms of production.
Yes, there it is. You're absolutely right. I mean, we wait to see, Howard, the details of what Mr Hunt says here. I would imagine if they are going to bung a road tax onto electric vehicles, it'll be a sort of a nominal 50 quid or something of that order, maybe something slightly less. But certainly it does kind of go very much against the grain of the spirit of what electric car owners thought they were buying into.
Absolutely right. And they are fantastic pieces of kit. I've driven them quite a lot and I'm a fan of them. But what I want to see is actually no bans involved in anything in the choice of transport. We should be actually allowing technology to dictate what we drive in terms of clean fuel technology. There are clean fuel catalysts at the moment that can halve emissions and improve fuel consumption by 10%. But we're being told electric vehicles are good and diesel and petrol is bad, and that's not right.
Yeah. It does seem to have divided itself up in that way, which is clearly nonsense. And, of course, as I say this till I'm blue in the face, Howard, you could have an old 1400 Fiesta that's 10 years old that you drive for 10 hours a day, or you could have a nice top-of-the-range Range Rover that you drive for a couple of hours a week. I know which one is gunking out more nonsense into the environment. It's not the 4x4.
Absolutely right. And it's an interesting thing. We all want a cleaner air. We all want to breathe clean air. We all want to actually have a nice environment. But again, it's a clueless government not knowing what to do. And this thing tomorrow about in terms of taxing EVs, you're quite right. I think it'll be a token on the VED type approach, vehicle excise duty. Or I don't think they'll have the guts to actually put, say, 10% on actually charging points, supercharging points. Maybe they do it that way, but I think that would be really, I think there'll be an uproar beyond belief.
I think you're right. And, of course, this comes off the back of news that we broke, I think, on this programme. Howard, certainly you joined us when we talked about it, that the cost of electricity now as well has meant that charging your electric vehicle in some areas can almost be up there with sticking fuel in your car.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think it was about 6 weeks ago they did a study on actually comparing the charging points, public charging points, versus filling up at the price per mile. And it was around about 19p per mile for diesel, petrol and electric. So where's the benefit there? And, of course, there's a lot of negatives about waiting half an hour, 2 hours or whatever you've got to do, all the things you know. The fact is that I think we've got to realise that we've got to be charging to use our roads because they're so pothole infested right across the country. Someone's got to pay for that, and it's not right that one group get away with not paying anything for it.
Absolutely. While you're with us, Howard, let's just have a word on this 20-mile-an-hour speed limit story. A new report says that cutting speeds to 20, we've seen this all over the place. It's often infuriating, particularly if you're driving at hours when there's not many people around. Apparently, it doesn't significantly improve safety. The findings published by the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health analysed data from before and after that 20 limit came in on 76 roads. They did this in Belfast, in the centre of Belfast in 2016. Comparisons with the street in the surrounding areas and elsewhere in Northern Ireland that retained their 30 or 40 limit showed there was no statistical difference in terms of the number of crashes, casualty rates or average traffic speed.
Well, I've been following this for a long time, and this report was actually sent to me last night, and I read it in detail. This is no surprise to me about this, but what we're not seeing is actually trying to legislate against dangerous driving. You can actually dangerously drive at 20 miles an hour because a lot of people are looking at the speedo to check that they are doing 20 and not looking at the roads. It's that sort of problems we're having. I'm all for 20 mile an hour speed limits around schools and hospitals and where places, old people's homes, etc. Oh, I'm nearly in one of those soon. But seriously, I think this is no surprise. We do not legislate. Bad driving is the problem, not necessarily the speed limit, especially at the lower end.
Absolutely. Just a final one. Somebody just texted in here. It was Gary. He says, please ask Howard why diesel is 25 to 30p more expensive than petrol. Good question.
Well, here we go. I don't know how many times I've said this, but it's very simple. The Ukrainian and Russian situation has actually generated a whole epidemic of speculators taking advantage of a non-volatile fuel we call diesel. We used to get 20% from Russia. We don't even get that now. Yeah. We're okay. But because it is a product that can store offshore in massive tankers, bringing it in from all around the world, these speculators are jacking up the price. And I've never seen the difference so much. There's about 24p difference between petrol and diesel at the moment, and it's disgusting because 65% of what's dispensed on the forecourt is diesel, the commercial heartbeat of the economy.
Absolutely. Howard, as ever, thank you. Howard Cox is the founder of Fair Fuel UK. Let's look at this. Classic 1980s sitcom Heidi High has been slapped with a new trigger warning. The show, which starred Sue Pollard, Ruth Maddock and others, followed the ups and downs of workers at a holiday camp, now available on the streaming platform BritBox. The programme will begin with a warning message of language and attitudes of the era that may offend. There's a host of other sitcoms that have also... This is just extraordinary. A host of other sitcoms that have been slapped with trigger warnings as well, including One Foot in the Grave. Who was offended by One Foot in the Grave? Who? I don't believe it. Fawlty Towers? Come on. Come on. I mean, Fawlty Towers does have... Yeah, there is, I think, the Major says a few naughty words. But, I mean, the overarching take from Fawlty Towers is that it's just a incredibly, brilliantly written, funny situation comedy. Hello, Hello is on there as well, which is there some kind of, I don't know, a lot of English actors playing French and foreign people doing kind of accents. Is that it? The Good Life. Now, The Good Life, okay. As a kid, I would never have entertained The Good Life because I would have thought, it's a bit... I think my mum had it on. It's a bit boring, really, a couple of people living in, very nice house in what looked like southwest London, who'd given up work to live off the fat of their own back garden. But actually, only later, when I started to watch it, I realised how brilliant every one of those four performances were. Felicity Kendall, Penelope Keith, Paul Eddington and Richard Bryars. And I think only two of those survived today, the two women. It was incredible, all down to good characters, right? Keeping up appearances. This used to be re-shown at about 1:30, didn't it, on BBC One up until about, Tuesday. Keeping up appearances. That was quite funny, wasn't it? I thought that was all right. Let's be with comedian Luke Stephen. Luke, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. How you doing?
All right. What's gone wrong with the world of comedy here? I mean, I've just literally mentioned some of our most classic sitcoms that apparently need a warning.
It's very strange. I can only assume BritBox have made a mistake and they don't really know what these shows are.
Yeah.
Like the Heidi High one, I watched a load of clips today, trying my hardest to find something offensive in this show. And there is nothing. It's such a broad comedy with a laughter track. It's a really well-crafted sitcom.
It was a beautiful sitcom, wasn't it?
It's so well thought out. You've got a Mr. Partridge who is a musical star reduced to doing Punch and Judy shows for children he hates. That is a funny dynamic.
Correct.
That's hilarious. You've got rather trained actresses with a love affair for the owner. She's trying to get with him. All these people hate doing what they're doing. You've got a maid who aspires to be this yellow coat. It's a perfect situation comedy. It ran for, I think, 7 years in the 80s.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So broad, laughter track. It's hilarious. There's no one. I don't know who's offended by that show.
And also, my reading of, you could say, Fawlty Towers or One Foot in the Grave were more. I mentioned The Good Life, which didn't appeal to me as a kid.
No.
But the Heidi High was a family show, right? I mean, it was aimed at anybody could watch it.
They showed it on Sunday evenings.
Correct. Yeah.
On God's Day. There was nothing offensive on that day in the 80s.
No.
It was a big primetime viewing. I think they re-showed it again in 2015. It's just, if you are putting a trigger warning on this, you will need to put trigger warnings on Miranda in 40 years' time.
Yeah, for maybe very different reasons, but that's another story.
I've watched that show a few times. It makes me laugh. I can't help it. It's silly. It's funny. like laughter's an involuntary reaction. It does make me laugh, that show. I kind of like, I know I should be liking things that are edgy, but that program just makes me laugh. I can't.
And there's nothing wrong with that, is it? I mean, I think people who are serious about liking comedy will invariably enjoy a kind of broad buffet of choices. You know, I can watch, you know, I don't know, you know, stuff that's written by Chris Morris and think it's the most fabulously, you know, intellectually well thought out, beautifully constructed comedy. But equally, I'm happy to sit and watch Only Fools and Horses, which is still, you know, one of the best ever written sitcoms, along with things like Heidi High.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We can't all like everything, but it's again, I just think comedy, again, is treated to the strangest standard ever. A trigger warning on comedies, I just find it really bizarre. You don't have trigger warnings on dramas that tackles really serious, hard issues and subjects and things like this. That there's a film that Idris Elba done in 2015. I don't know if you've seen it, Beasts of No Nation.
Yes.
Really, really hard cutting film. Like quite uncomfortable to watch, but there's no trigger warnings on that, and that is a hard watch, but it's brilliant. But a comedy show, trigger warnings, you might understand what it is. We don't think you're as smart as we are, and you can't understand the irony and the lines in this comedy.
And what's funny about it as well, Luke, is that, you know, this is BritBox, so people have already paid a subscription for this, and one assumes that part of the thinking might be that you want to rewatch a load of old sitcoms like 40 Towers, Hello, Hello, Heidi High.
Exactly. That's so they know what they're getting when they're going for this. I mean, I heard you say as well is that with the lower low, it could be like French people doing, I don't know, God forbid, someone playing someone who they're not in acting.
Yeah, as an actor, what a strange thing.
Yes, and I think maybe with 40 Towers, because obviously Manuel wasn't from Barcelona, so maybe that's a slight sign.
It could be the Manuel thing, and then there's the German one, isn't there? You know, that obviously upset a lot of people, but then, you know, I don't know.
But it's all born out of Basil Fawlty's total ineptitude to run a hotel. Like, he's the butt of every single joke. Manuel is not the butt of the joke. Manuel is not the idiot in that. It's his frustration with Manuel that he can't understand. We're not laughing at Manuel for being ridiculous, you know, Spaniard not knowing what's going on. It's Basil Fawlty who's the frustrated guy. He's the guy who was in the wrong, clearly.
And there's not a bad episode of it, is there? I think, didn't they only make about 14 of them or something?
I think they did 12, and it was a 4-year gap, I think, between two series.
Wow.
Which is just, but it's so well crafted. It's so well written. It's one of the, it's John Cleese. John Cleese has written some of the most amazing comedies ever. If you go back and watch A Fish Called Wanda, I mean, that film is so underrated.
A Fish Called Wanda, I've forgotten all about that. It's a great movie. Back in the day when I left school, I got a holiday job on a summer job on a holiday camp, and this was sort of just post the Heidi High era, but Sue Pollard was booked to come to the holiday camp every week to make it as a personal appearance. It's only now, as a fully fledged adult, I realise that they were probably paying her about $100,000 to tour all the holiday camps and do this kind of 1-hour appearance and sign autographs. And I honestly, I cannot overstate how famous these people were from that era. I mean, obviously you've got a captive audience on a holiday camp, but she would show up. It was I think she used to come at like 10 o'clock on a Friday morning, and there'd be like 2,000 people queued up to see and have their photograph taken with Sue Pollard.
And that's amazing.
They were massive stars, weren't they?
Yeah, they were huge stars. Well, everyone was watching them. If you're on a show that's running for 7 years in like the 80s, throughout that decade, I mean, when did Channel 4 come in? Later in the 80s, didn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
You only really had 3 channels. So if you were on TV on a popular sitcom, you were
massive,
famous. Everybody knew who you were. But I kind of like the fact of it being on BritBox and Sue Pollard still getting syndicate money from it. She's still living off this show. I mean, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. I hope she did the right. There was no what they call a buyout, as you know, and she was, she's still able to get the repeats on that, because I'm sure I think John Inman did quite well out of Are You Being Served, didn't he? Which went like great guns in America for some reason.
I mean, it's amazing. But that's I think in the UK we do comedy the best. We write some of the most amazing comedies that stand the test of time.
Yeah.
I mean, Porridge as well is another one. If you look back at the 90s,
Porridge is absolutely stunning.
It's still so strong today, and that's that's 50 years ago now. We continue to produce the best, and the idea we now don't think British audiences can handle jokes anymore. So we need to warn them. I mean, people in their daily lives will go through more dangerous and telling times than an episode of Heidi High. I think you can, if you can exist and live life, you can watch an episode of that and not be triggered.
Totally. Luke, thank you as ever. Luke Stephen, comedian with us here. He's absolutely spot on that last point. I'd go further. I think Heidi High should be shown in assembly at school before you start your daily lesson to put a bit of a smile on your face. An episode of, I don't know, Hello, Hello wouldn't go amiss either. And, of course, they were written by the guys behind Dad's Army. And although Dad's Army isn't really one of... For some reason, I never bought into that. I know it's sacrilege to say that you're not a big Dad's Army fan. Something about the situation was never appealing to me, not the writing or the acting or anything like that. It just the whole arm. A bit like Vickers. Vicar of Dibley never did it. The other one, not Father Ted, although that was, slightly in another league in terms of how it was written. But... this is well-written stuff. This is beautifully crafted stuff, and it's very, very funny. And the idea that we live in a world where you've got to put a trigger warning on Heidi Flippin' High is where we've arrived in the topsy-turvy world of absolute nonsense. Good Lord.
I'm Vanessa Felds. Join me every weekday from 4 till 7 on talkTV.